Thank you, Chairman Hoeven and Vice Chairman Udall, for holding this hearing on my legislation, the Safeguarding Tribal Objects of Patrimony, or STOP Act. And I would also like to thank the members of this committee who are co-sponsors of this legislation. I believe that 8 out of the 15 members of the committee have signed on in support. This bill's strong bipartisan support gives me hope that we can solve this problem for tribal communities that we represent in the very near future. The need for this legislation is straightforward. We all recognize the incredible beauty of American Indian art. Especially when you live in a state like New Mexico, you can explore and admire the remnants of ancient culture in places like Chaco Canyon and the Gila Cliff Dwellings. And you can discover both traditional and modern art masterpieces created by Native artists. But we can also recognize that there's a clear difference between supporting tribal artists or collecting artifacts ethically and legally, as opposed to dealing or exporting items that tribes have identified as essential and sacred pieces of their cultural heritage. This issue came up last year when Pueblo of Acoma Governor Kurt Riley, here today, discovered that a sacred ceremonial shield had been stolen and was about to be sold to the highest bidder in Paris. I look forward to hearing Governor Riley's testimony today so that he can tell us all about the devastating impact that cultural theft has on communities like his. When Governor Riley informed me about this robbery of the Pueblo's cultural patrimony last year, I called on the State Department to take all possible action to halt that auction. Thankfully, intense public outcry and diplomatic pressure were enough to halt the illegal sale of a tribe's cultural patrimony, but the case is still pending, and the shield has not been returned to the Pueblo. And in many other cases, tribes in New Mexico and across the nation have been forced to effectively pay a ransom or had to stand by and watch the sale of priceless religious and cultural items in international markets. Under current federal law, it is a crime to sell these types of protected Native American cultural objects in the United States. Unfortunately, however, the penalties in the Archaeological Resources Protection Act and the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act are not as high as other similar statutes like the National Stolen Property Act. Prosecutions are too infrequent to deter criminals from smuggling and selling these objects. And there is no explicit ban on exporting these items to foreign nations where they might be sold at auction, a fact that was cited by the French government when they initially declined to stop the auction of the Acoma Shield. That is why I introduced the Safeguard Tribal Objects of Patrimony, or STOP Act. The STOP Act increases penalties for illegally trafficking tribal cultural patrimony. It also explicitly prohibits exporting these objects and establishes a federal policy to encourage the voluntary return of sacred objects held in private collections. While improving federal law to create a stronger legal deterrence, if we're going to end cultural theft, we also need to change the hearts and minds of collectors and dealers who are engaged in it. And I appreciate the collaboration and support that we've had with New Mexico's Pueblos, the Jicarilla and Mescalero Apache nations, the Navajo Nation, and tribes across Indian country to craft this legislation. I am proud that the STOP Act has the support of the National Congress of American Indians, the All-Indian Pueblo Council, United South and Eastern Tribes Sovereignty Protection Fund, the Great Plains Tribal Chairmen's Association, the Midwest Alliance of Sovereign Tribes, and more than 20 individual tribal nations. The widespread support for the STOP Act across Indian country is unfortunate evidence of how widespread theft and illegal sales of tribal patrimony have been. When I introduced the STOP Act earlier this year, I met with high school students from the Santa Fe Indian Schools Leadership Institute who had come to Capitol Hill to advocate for important issues in their communities. These students shared with me a position paper that they had prepared on the importance of passing the STOP Act. They also shared personal stories about how important protecting cultural items is to their generation as they work to fulfill their sacred trust as generations before them have. Listening to what these incredible young people had to say reinforced the urgency that we must act with to return and safeguard these items. We need to take all possible action to repatriate stolen, culturally significant items to their rightful owners. So again, I'm grateful to you both for holding this hearing, Chairman Hoven, Vice Chairman Udall, and I hope that you will work to pass the STOP Act out of this committee and work with me to pass it in the full Senate as soon as possible. Thank you both very much. Thanks to the committee. Governor Riley, it's been more than a year and a half now since your pueblo first discovered that the Acoma shield was on the auction block in Paris, France. But that was far from the first time something like this has happened. Could you tell us a little bit about whether you're aware of additional cases before or since then of sacred items being sold internationally? Is this a one-off issue, or is this something that you see a great deal of?
Chairman, Vice Chairman, Senator Udall, or Senator Heinrich, thank you for the question. Members of the committee, before I came to the hearing today, I did send word out through the El Pueblo Council of Governors network and asked my fellow governors if there were any instances of items that were sold from their pueblos since 2016, and the answer was a resounding yes. So this is not just a one-time occurrence. It continues to today.
How urgent is it for your pueblo and tribes across the country for the federal government to take some concrete action to stop these auctions? And particularly, do you believe that we should wait for the GAO study before taking action on this?
Again, thank you, Senator. Chairman, members of the committee. It's urgent. I can't say or cannot express how urgent it is to me. The shield must come home. This is my second term as governor. It's an appointed position. We don't run for these offices. And since it's been so long, members of the community, especially the religious people of my community, have expressed, please just bring it home. It's not that easy. And so that sense of urgency is there within my community. And I'm sure across Native America, as we all realize, just in a small survey that I did just recently, these cultural items are continuing to leave and go across the seas to be sold. So there is a sense of urgency. Should we wait for the GAO report? In my opinion, actions can be taken now without the GAO report. However, I think once the GAO report comes out, it will only confirm what we as Native tribes, pueblos, and nations in this country know, that it is happening and it's still happening today.
Mr. Tsuda, I find it deeply troubling to learn that almost 10 months into a new administration, that the Department of Interior itself has not looked into what policy changes are necessary to stop the trafficking of sacred tribal objects. In your testimony, you say that the department is waiting to hear from the GAO before forming a policy on this subject. But surely your staff already has the information necessary to develop a position on this issue. In fact, the Department of Interior was engaged in an extensive tribal consultation process just last year to hear from tribes on this issue. So I too look forward to hearing the GAO's analysis, and I hope we can learn from it. I hope it recommends additional solutions. But I also hope that the department is not abdicating its responsibilities to tribes by declining to develop its own plans to solve this problem, given what we know. Can you share with us any changes that the department has made or intends to make to help stop the export of these objects, or any policy ideas or recommendations that you would like to make on this topic?
I think the department, so under current authorities, the department has been involved in efforts in the past, and I think the governor alluded to that, and we obviously will try to do what we can. The importance of this, and I agree with the governor, this is hugely important. Tribal history and culture are woven into American history and culture, so it's obviously important and should be important to all of us. But that means that we need to get it right, I think. And so that's the reason that And we want to wait for the GAO report. The full responsibility isn't just in our hands. We have the Department of Justice and the State Department that have some a role in this, and we want to make sure that at the end result of it, that we have all the tools in hand that we need to be able to protect our tribal history, culture, objects of cultural heritage, and that we do it the right way so that our actions are defensible and we can proceed with prosecutions and not have any questions on constitutional or other criminal law questions that would rise and hinder our efforts to protect that.
Well, both Senator Udall and I have some experience with this, and while I've got to go to another commitment, I suspect he may have some additional questions based on our experience directly with these issues. So thank you.